My girlfriend left me for her charming coworker after I caught him trying to isolate her. Now I'm wondering if I overreacted or saved myself from heartbreak. I, 24, and my girlfriend, 23F, Anne, began dating in college. Last week, Anne invited me to her coworker's Joe party. I had heard a lot about him in the past, and he and she really seemed to have a lot in common, especially with their taste in music. Apparently, he was an amateur musician with a fairly successful YouTube channel. Joe initially invited only Anne, but when she asked him if I could tag along, he said it was fine. The party was on Saturday evening. It was a fun party with about 30 people, held at a restaurant Joe had rented out. Towards the end, though, I wandered into Anne's little discussion group, and I immediately got the feeling that nobody really wanted me there, most of all Anne. It was her, Joe, and a few other people. Thinking that I was just imagining things, I hung around and listened to Joe basically boast about himself the whole time. A little while later, I wandered off to get myself a drink and chat with a few other people. Eventually, the time to leave came around, and I went to find Anne again. Joe approached me at that point and said that he was having an after-party over at his house. I was going to refuse, but then he said, "Sorry, man, but only Anne is invited," while clapping me on the shoulder. I first told him not to touch me, and then said, "She's not going." He informed me that she had already accepted the invitation. I texted Anne immediately to ask where she was. She responded, "Sorry, on the way to Joe's place. I'll see you tomorrow, love you." I asked if she knew I wasn't invited, and she then left me on read. Texts after that were all ignored. I drove home furious. I stayed up all night, and finally Anne walked in the door at 5:42 a.m. I know because I was by the window watching. I recognized the car as Joe's and the driver as Joe. Nobody else was in the car. Anne waved to him cutely and laughed at something he said. Anne came inside and acted surprised to see me still up. At that point, I flatly told her that we were done, and she had the rest of the day to move out. Anne was at first confused with me, and then I told her that she can just move in with Joe. She rolled her eyes and said nothing happened. She gave me this spiel about my insecurities and imagination. I said it didn't matter. After this back and forward arguing, Anne finally relented and sarcastically thanked me for wasting the best years of her life. Anne finally moved out yesterday, and it was pretty dramatic. She said that she loved me, and that I was throwing away everything over a party. Did I do her wrong here? I feel like I'm getting gaslighted. Update 1. It's been a few days since Anne moved out, and I can honestly say it feels strange. I thought I'd feel this overwhelming sense of relief, but instead, I'm stuck in this weird emotional limbo. The apartment feels emptier than ever. Each corner seems to echo with memories of her laughter and our late-night talks. I tried keeping busy with work, but the silence here is suffocating, and I find myself lost in thought more often than not. Last night, I made dinner for one, and even simple things like frying an egg felt foreign without her there to joke about my cooking skills. I swear, I can still hear her teasing me about how I always burnt the toast. As I sat at the table, I kept replaying that night over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Did I overreact? I've always prided myself on being rational, but in that moment, everything felt so raw. My friends said I did the right thing, but part of me wonders if they're just saying that to make me feel better. I remember how confident Anne used to be, and it made me think about how I've changed since we started dating. She often said I was too focused on my insecurities, and I can see how that spiraled out of control when I felt like Joe was trying to overshadow me. They had this connection I couldn't deny, and it gnawed at me. Even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't truly stand a chance against someone so charismatic and talented. I mean, Joe had a YouTube channel, a decent following, and a passion for music that was undeniably appealing. With time dragging on, I realized I needed to reconnect with my friends. It took me a while to reach out because I felt like I'd been living under a rock. I texted Mark and told him I could use a distraction, maybe grab a drink. He responded almost immediately, saying he'd pick me up in an hour. When he arrived, I was surprised at how good it felt to hang out again. We hit a local bar, and I allowed myself to be immersed in the atmosphere. Music was blaring, laughter surrounded us, and I could finally breathe again. Mark was relentless with his jokes, and I found myself laughing for the first time in days. I really needed that. At one point, we were at the bar waiting for our drinks, and I noticed a couple at the other end of the room. The guy was really charming, gesturing animatedly as he made the girl laugh. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy, and I tried to push it aside. I thought about how that could have been Anne and me if things had gone differently. It hit me that my life could still be fun and fulfilling, even without her. As the night went on, we ended up singing karaoke. I've never been a big fan of it, but with a couple of drinks in me, I felt brave. I picked a song that was catchy and silly, and to my surprise, people cheered. I couldn't believe it. For a moment, I was free. Mark joined in, and soon we had the whole bar singing along. I felt alive, and it reminded me of what I had lost, but also what I could still find. After the karaoke session, Mark asked me if I wanted to hang out more often. I realized how important it was to nurture my friendships, especially during this time. I agreed to make it a weekly thing. When I got home, the emptiness hit me again, but I told myself that this was just a chapter ending, not the whole book. I finally started to consider that maybe, just maybe, I could move on from Anne and start a new journey. Then, out of nowhere, I received a text from Anne. It was late, and I didn't even know how she got my new number. She asked if we could talk, and my heart raced. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part was undeniably curious. So, I replied, telling her I was busy but could meet up in a few days. As I lay in bed that night, I kept staring at the ceiling, contemplating whether I should meet her. Did I want closure? Did I want to revisit what we had? Or was it just a pitfall waiting to happen? I didn't know if I was ready for another conversation filled with emotions that I thought I had buried deep down, but a part of me thought that maybe it could offer some clarity. I finally decided that I needed to confront my feelings, and maybe this would help me do just that. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I wasn't looking forward to dredging up old wounds, but I was determined to be honest with myself. As I fell asleep, I reflected on how much I had changed since that night, realizing that I was learning more about myself than I had ever anticipated. It was a tough journey, and I knew that the road ahead would be filled with ups and downs. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, ready to face whatever came next. Update 2. I've taken some time to think things through since I agreed to meet Anne. We're set to meet up tomorrow, and honestly, I'm a bundle of nerves. I know I need to go into this meeting with my eyes wide open. There's no going back to how things were, but I can't shake this nagging feeling that I still want some clarity. After spending a day trying to keep my mind off it, I decided to hang out with Mark again. We met up at that same bar where we had our karaoke night. It felt good to be in a familiar place, with laughter and music surrounding me. Mark was in high spirits, and I tried my best to keep up. We ended up sitting at the bar, catching up on life, and discussing everything from work to relationships. Somehow, the topic of Anne came up. Mark asked how I was holding up, and if I felt like I could really trust her again. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a swirl of emotions. I explained that part of me still cared about her, and I wanted to believe she hadn't meant to hurt me. But another part felt betrayed, and I couldn't ignore that. I told Mark about her apology, how she claimed that Joe had manipulated her after we broke up, and how I was torn between wanting to believe her and feeling angry about everything. Mark listened intently and then said something that resonated with me. He said, "You need to remember that love doesn't have to be a one-way street. If you decide to give her another chance, it has to be mutual. You both need to meet halfway, and trust can't be one-sided." It hit me hard. I'd been so caught up in my emotions that I hadn't considered the importance of rebuilding trust together, not just on my terms. As the night wore on, I noticed that I was starting to feel better. We got caught up in conversation, and for a moment, I forgot all about Anne and the weight of the past few weeks. I even joined Mark in another round of karaoke, this time embracing the absurdity of it all. As we sang our hearts out, I could feel my anxiety melting away, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and freedom. When I got home that night, I was exhausted but oddly content. I decided to focus on myself a little more. I browsed some new hobbies online, looking into photography and maybe even picking up a guitar. After all, I used to love music before I got so wrapped up in my relationship. I realized I needed to rediscover who I was outside of Anne, and that felt empowering. The next day, as I prepared for my meeting with her, I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. I couldn't help but think about what I wanted to say. Did I want to give her another chance? Or was it time to firmly close the door? I wrote down some notes, trying to organize my thoughts, but I knew it was going to be emotional. Finally, the time came for our meeting. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop that had become our go-to spot during our relationship. As I walked in, my heart raced. She was already sitting at a table, her eyes scanning the room nervously. When she saw me, her face brightened, but I couldn't help but notice the tension in her shoulders. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I slid into the seat across from her. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before falling into a heavy silence. I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I guess I just wanted to know why you didn't tell me about Joe trying to reach out after we broke up." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't know how to explain it. I was so confused after you broke up with me. I felt like I lost my safety net. Joe was persistent, and I didn't know how to push him away without causing more drama." I listened closely, trying to remain open-minded. "But you knew how I felt about him. I thought we had built a foundation of trust, and then I felt like you just tossed it aside." "I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I realize now that I was trying to fit into this new life without you, and it all spiraled. I should have communicated better, and I'm so sorry." Her eyes were sincere, but I still felt that gnawing insecurity creeping back in. "So, what happens now? Do you want to try to go back to how things were?" I asked, watching her carefully. "I don't want to be just friends if we have a chance to fix what we had," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I also understand if you need time. You deserve to be happy." As she spoke, I found myself grappling with the choice ahead of me. I still cared for her, but could I truly trust her again? My mind raced with possibilities, and I realized that I couldn't rush this decision. I needed to protect myself, but I also didn't want to shut the door entirely on the relationship we had built. "I need to think about it," I finally said. "We can't rush into anything, especially after everything that's happened. I think we both need to figure out what we want." She nodded, her expression softening. "I understand. Just know that I want to make this work, if you're open to it." We wrapped up our conversation, agreeing to take some time apart, but still keeping the door open. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but at least I had a clearer understanding of where we both stood. It felt like a step forward, and even though I was still uncertain, I finally felt ready to face whatever came next. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since that meeting with Anne, and I've been doing a lot of soul-searching. After our conversation, I felt like I was floating in a cloud of uncertainty, grappling with a mix of emotions. I told myself that it was okay to take my time to figure things out. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, but the longer I went without clarity, the more I found myself cycling through anger, sadness, and even nostalgia. Initially, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the lingering questions about Anne. The days became a blur of spreadsheets and deadlines, and for a while, it worked. But as the weeks dragged on, I couldn't escape the feeling that I needed to confront my feelings, not just about Anne, but about myself, too. One night, as I scrolled through social media, I saw a post from Joe. It was a video showcasing his music and the production he had been working on. He looked effortlessly charming, surrounded by friends who were clearly enjoying his performance. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, and it hit me hard that I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my past. I realized I was giving him too much power over my feelings. I took a deep breath, put my phone down, and decided it was time for a change. I needed to reclaim my identity, so I signed up for a photography class at a local community center. It felt good to focus on something new and creative. The first class was a revelation. I found myself captivated by the way light danced through the lens, and I lost track of time as I experimented with different techniques. I found a new passion and a new way to express myself, and that shift helped ground me. I started capturing moments around me, trying to find beauty in the everyday chaos of life. I began to appreciate the world beyond my relationship with Anne, and I realized how much I had overlooked while being consumed by my insecurities. As I began to build my confidence, I also began to think about my relationship with Anne again. One evening, I decided to reach out. I sent her a message suggesting we meet up, not to rehash everything, but just to catch up as friends. To my surprise, she responded enthusiastically. We decided to meet at a local park, a spot we used to frequent. The sun was shining and there was a light breeze, making it a perfect day. When I arrived, I felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. As I walked through the park, I saw her sitting on a bench, a soft smile on her face. "Hey," I said as I approached. "Hey," she replied, her voice bright. We exchanged pleasantries and shared what had been happening in our lives since we last met. I told her about my photography class, and she seemed genuinely interested. It felt easy to talk, and for a moment, I was able to let go of the tension that had lingered between us. Then, after a few light-hearted exchanges, I broached the topic we both knew was inevitable. "So, where do we stand?" Her smile faded slightly, and she took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about that too. I don't want to pressure you, but I want you to know I've been working on myself. I know I made mistakes, but I want to be better, not just for us, but for me." I appreciated her honesty, and it made me reflect on how I felt. I think it's important for both of us to understand what we want individually before we can consider anything together. I've realized that I need to feel secure in myself first. She nodded, her eyes sincere. I completely agree. I don't want to rush back into anything unless it feels right for both of us. We talked about our feelings, our past, and what we hoped for the future. It felt like we were finally on the same page. There was no pressure, just a mutual understanding that we needed to focus on ourselves first. As we walked through the park, I felt lighter. There was a certain clarity in our conversation, and it was liberating to finally express what I had been feeling. We agreed to take things slow, perhaps start as friends again, and see where life took us. After our meetup, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I finally felt empowered to take control of my life. I was excited about my photography and eager to explore new friendships. I started posting my photos on social media, and to my surprise, I received a lot of positive feedback. The encouragement from others fueled my passion, and I found myself wanting to learn more. I even considered entering some local competitions to challenge myself further. A few weeks later, I got a message from Anne asking if I'd like to attend one of Joe's music events together. It surprised me, but I agreed, wanting to show that I was secure in my own identity. When we arrived at the venue, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Anne seemed a bit anxious too, but as we watched Joe perform, I found myself feeling surprisingly at ease. I realized I wasn't competing for Anne's attention anymore. I was there as an equal, proud of who I had become. As the night wore on, I could see Anne enjoying herself, laughing and cheering with the crowd. I was happy to see her so carefree, and for the first time, I felt no jealousy or resentment. I understood that this was a part of her world, and I was learning to embrace it, just as she was learning to embrace mine. The night ended on a high note, and as we drove home, I felt a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. We still had a long way to go, but I knew that whatever happened next would unfold naturally. In the end, this experience taught me more than I could have imagined. I learned to prioritize my happiness, confront my insecurities, and most importantly, understand that relationships can evolve. I'm excited about the future no matter what shape it takes, and I'm finally ready to embrace life with open arms.